Welcome to the Inspirational Women's Series, our monthly Rosh Chodesh Women's event open to all. Yes, yesterday was Rosh Chodesh Nisan, the month of miracles, the month we became a nation. I mean, think about it. We were slaves in Egypt in a state of despair, and yet we were able to get out and become a nation. And not only did we become a people, we became a unified people. As it says, Vayichan Sham Yisrael ke'ish echad belev echad. Each person was with the same heart at the foot of Sinai, which is a miracle in itself. Can you imagine a shul that has one single heart, one single idea? The diversity that exists always existed, and yet they were able to unite. That was a miracle. This past year hasn't been easy. We've been isolated, lost loved ones, felt alienated, and most of the connection was done virtually, online, with phone calls and meeting in pairs. And now we are slowly easing out of lockdown, reuniting as a community. So let us return ke'ish echad belev echad. COVID has taught us many things, that we could connect virtually. It's wonderful to make connections from all over the world and even with your next door neighbor. And COVID has taught us to cherish the moments, to make every second count. Stop and smell the roses. Don't take things for granted. And if you don't agree with someone or something, it's not the end of the world. Now it's time for miracles, for us to come together. As diverse as we are, let us cherish that. Let us embrace it and make it something special. Here at Norris Lee, we are a very diverse community. We have several minyanim. While our main minyan is Ashkenaz, we also have quite a few Sephardim in our community. And yet, even amongst the Sephardim, there is diversity. So tonight we will discuss that and embrace the beauty of diversity. I am pleased to welcome Daisy Abboudi, a local young woman who is an historian and an expert in the Jewish community of Sudan. Both her paternal and her maternal grandparents were either born or grew up in Sudan. This inspired her to create the website Tales of Jewish Sudan in 2015. Daisy is also the deputy director of the oral history charity of Sephardi Voices of UK, which documents the experiences and testimonies of Sephardi and Mizrahi Jews from the Middle East, North Africa, and Iran, who now live in the UK. She was interviewed by the BBC, French I-24, Israel, and now with us at Norris Lee. It is my pleasure to welcome Daisy.
Hi, thank you.
Welcome, Daisy.
Thank you for having me
here. So Daisy, please tell us how you started this Tales of Jewish Sudan. We mentioned that it's part of your heritage, but to create a whole website and go into the history of it, please tell us how it all started.
So I studied history at university, ancient history, so like Roman, Greek period. And I finished my master's and I didn't really know what to do. And I was kind of floating around a bit. And I thought, well, until I decide, I'll interview some people from the community of my grandparents and their friends and their cousins, and, maybe collect a few recipes and that will take me like a few months and we'll see what happens from there. And 5.5 years later, that's not quite what happened. So it kind of just snowballed from there. The more people I started talking to, the more I was learning. And I thought, actually the idea, Sudan in my head before was this kind of like almost half fairy tale place in the past that was the stuff of bedtime stories from my grandparents. And I was learning.
You're from London, right? You're born in London?
I was born here in London. Yeah. So it was just like this completely far away place. And the more I started to talk to people, the more I got into the actual history of it and finding out, the reality and getting more stories. And the stories kind of overtook the recipes a little bit.
Did you even know where it was on the map?
Yeah, I knew where it was on the map. I knew it was a real place. I knew kind of the rough general, that it was under a dictatorship, but that was kind of it. And it was because when I was when I was really small, we would do the chagim at my mum's parents, at my grandparents' house. And afterwards, like it would be their cousins and their, you know, it was like the extended family, and they were, you know, it was very it was quite loud and quite, you know, and then afterwards we would kind of, everyone would go to bed, and I'm the oldest grandchild, so I was allowed to stay up a little bit later. And I used to go, and they used to tell me stories about, you know, in my grandparents' bed, tell me stories about their childhood, about, you know, all these things. And that's kind of where it came from.
But have you met any other Sudanese like before your family?
Jewish Sudanese or Sudanese?
No, like yeah, I guess Jewish Sudanese, yeah.
Yeah. So I knew like my family and their friends, and it's a very small community. It was only 250 families or so. So they all kind of know each other, you know. So yes, I did know them. I've met a lot more that I hadn't met since I started, but I did know enough.
So when you started digging into it, what did you find? I mean, so you realized that there was this whole community dating back when?
So there was a community before the British Empire. The British Empire came to Sudan in 1898. There were Jews before that time, but they weren't an organized community. There was no rabbi, there was no synagogue, and they were mostly like traders or merchants that had come down from Egypt and kind of had a second house there for while they were trading, and all this kind of thing. Some of them were living in Durman, which was the main city of the time. And then just about 13 years before the British Empire, Sudan was under the Ottoman Empire, and there was a revolution for independence, and they succeeded. But the Mahdi, the leader of this revolution, was also a very fundamentalist Islamist, and he declared that everyone should convert to Islam, because he was trying to target the Christian missionaries. But there were also a few Jews there who got caught up in these laws, so they converted to Islam. And when the British Empire came, those laws were repealed. Some of them chose to come back to Judaism. Some of them chose to stay Muslim, and they're still living in Sudan. Wow. So, and then after that, there was more Jews started coming from all over the Middle East, and a community was built. You know, the rabbi came, and they had synagogues, and, you know, the things that make a community rather than a small collection of Jews.
Right. So when you were researching it, there was no other documentation before you found
There's one book that was written by the son of the rabbi, but that's it in terms of the kind of daily life history. There's a few academic articles in Hebrew, a couple in English, but not much at all.
Right. So, I mean, Sudan came into the news just, you know, because of the Netflix film and the book, right, of the Red Sea Spies, right, where it was sort of a passageway from the Ethiopians to escape to Israel. Like we see it on the map. I know Edward has a map just to let people, you know, visualize that where it's actually located. You know, really. So the direct, it's really very close to Egypt. So it looks like that's really where the Jews came from a lot. Is that right? Did you find that?
So they all came through Egypt, because the railway that the British built went from Egypt down into Sudan. If you go back to the map, if you can, so actually kind of where the word Sudan is kind of where the main cities are. So, and that's about 11 hours driving from the border of Egypt, just to give you a perspective of how big the country is. So you needed a rail. It was a journey to get from Egypt to Sudan. It wasn't just like, oh, let's pop across the border. So like people that were going to Sudan, it was kind of like a frontier. Like they were going there for business. It was like a new frontier. They weren't people, you know. Generally, it was like people going either to get married, or they would come back, and, you know, young men and their families. It wasn't. It was. You had to be a little bit adventurous to go to live in Sudan at that early period.
Right, but you say they had a community. I mean, what kind of community did they have? They celebrated the holidays like they were regular, like Jews,
So
they had the same rituals and.
Yeah, so it was a mixture of all the Middle Eastern kind of communities, and a few Ashkenazim came as well, like just a small handful, but they kind of adopted the customs of the Sudanese Jews. So yeah, there was like I say, Rabbi Malka. So he was from the beginning. He died in 1949, but he was the mohel, he was the shochet, he was the rabbi. Like he did
one man show.
One man show.
Small community. That's what you got. That's right.
Yeah, of course. It was a small community, one synagogue that everyone went to.
So no fights.
Well, there were fights, but
yeah,
you know.
well, that's what my opening was, right? We have such even
exactly.
there's diversity, but we have to just be able to become one.
Yeah, they didn't. I think that's what's actually really interesting about the Jews of Sudan is that because they were so small, because the community was so small, there wasn't space or time for them to be too picky about who they were mixing with within the Jewish community. I mean, they were also friends with the wider community, and they were under the Bet Din of Egypt. So
interesting.
But they weren't, they didn't have space. If you were a Syrian Jew or your family had come from Syria, you couldn't be like, oh, I just want to marry a Syrian. There weren't enough. Like you had to marry someone from Iraq or from Egypt, and it kind of merged together very quickly to form this Sudanese Jewish identity, because they were all coming from everywhere, and they were all coming kind of without families, the first people that arrived. So kind of eventually everyone from Sudan, like I said, it was only about 250 families. Eventually everyone is related to everyone.
Right. But are there any Jews there today? Anybody?
No.
They all left. They all left, but they're all still connected with each other.
They're all still connected. They all still kind of know each other. Maybe like 20 years ago, they were still like visiting. Now they're very old. They're like in their 80s, 90s. The people who are living in Sudan. But yeah, like, I mean, the people in London, for example, if someone dies, everyone is at the funeral, everyone's at the Shiva. Like they still know each other, and they're still there when big events happen. They still kind of.
I know you shared you shared a photo with us. I think it was over Sukkot, was it, that everybody came together? I think Edward has a nice.
Yeah, I think, as far as I'm aware, this is the first Sukkot in the club. So they had a Jewish club that was built in, I think, 1947, and this was, I think, the like kind of inaugural big Sukkot dinner in the club. So this is like, I think, 1947, 48, something like that. That's Rabbi Malka at the very head of the table in the middle, and he died in 1949, so it has to be before that.
So is the next generation close to, like, your generation?
I would say the next generation kind of is slightly more pocketed, so you'd know kind of your parents or your grandparents' kind of closer friendship group rather than but I think also I've kind of brought people together a little bit from what I've been doing with like my Facebook page, and I think people have started to kind of connect a little bit more again, which has been really, really nice to see.
I mean, it's really amazing. You have a small community, like I said, 250 families, and then, or people, were they, or with
250 families, so about like 1,000 people probably.
Right. I mean, so that's something that you're really reviving, that they had something special there, and like a real family. And I'm sure they're, now that you made it available online, they're connecting, and you did a lot of. That's how you got involved with oral history. You were able to document a lot of.
So I started to kind of interview them, and I mean, if I look at my first interviews, they weren't really good. I kind of taught a bit self-taught as I was going on, and through that I became more involved with the Jewish community, because I live in South London, so like so I kind of got a bit more plugged into the North London Jewish community. I was at an event at the Jewish Museum, and I met the director of Sephardi Voices there, Dr. Bea Lefkowitz. And she kind of had heard about what I was doing, and I spoke to her, and I started working for Sephardi Voices kind of through that. Obviously, they interviewed me and stuff, but so that's kind of how that happened. And then she gave me, because she's an oral historian, that's her PhD, she's an academic oral historian, so she gave me extra training to do further interviews.
Right.
So, yeah.
And so the Sephardic UK, so what does that include? Is that just the Middle East, or?
So Sephardi Voices UK. So it's called Sephardi, even though it's the Middle East, North Africa, and Iran, because it's kind of like an all-encompassing term rather than, Sephardi Mizrahi Voices doesn't flow off the tongue quite so well.
Spanish and Portuguese, you have all that.
Yeah, because it's not Spanish and Portuguese only. It's those communities were kind of joined, that they were there for like thousands of years, and then they were joined by Jews fleeing the Spanish Inquisition, and then, that was in like 15th century. So all that time they like blended and things, a lot of stuff happened. So we just say Sephardi Voices. And we also interview people from the Baghdadi communities of the Far East, so India and those countries as well.
Right.
But I think we got the video.
Yeah, so you have a video that
you. So I didn't do all of these interviews. So some of these interviews were done before I joined, and some subsequently as well. So
let's take a look at the video to show really the diversity that exists even with so-called, Sephardic, Mizrahi, S&P, whatever you want to call it. But if Edward, could you please share the video now? Thank you.
The preparation of Pesach was 1 month, 2 months before. We used to paint the house every single year. The whole house had to be painted. And the carpet used to be all out, washed, clean. And the rice has to be checked 3 times. Check it by hand. And my mother used to put us all around the table. Each one has to pick a little bit. We had to help. There wasn't such a thing, no help. It doesn't exist. We used to help. It has to be cleaned 3 times, the rice. And then minced. We didn't have a magi mix. It was all done by hand. And make it as a powder. And from that, we make dough to make kibbeh for Pesach, because we didn't have wheat. And we made everything else from that, from the rice. Like an ingredient.
I even remember sometimes they would scrub them. And we had special, and then they have the excitement of ordering the matzah, which was baked especially for you. You go to the synagogues where those who bakers are there, or the ovens are there, and you order for you. So it's baked for you. You'd like it a little bit more harder or softer.
Well, actually, my grandfather started the business. He had a printing house, printing Hebrew books at the time. This is the Haggadah my grandfather printed in his printing house, which was in Hebrew and translated in Arabic, but Hebrew letters.
On Pesach night, my father had a very good voice, and he used to sing all the songs, and we used to enjoy the whole evening. But it went on, and we were, by the time was Afyakuman, we were all asleep under the table.
In a part of the Passover, one of the songs, they do it with the sound of the Aida, because the Aida opera was inaugurated in Egypt, in Cairo.
The only one that I know is when you go through the Pesach Seder, and we do the different parts of the Seder to the tune of the old Egyptian national anthem.
That's what I mean, that one and the Aida.
And the Egyptian Kadesh Urchatz Karpas.
Yeah, exactly.
They used to cut the afikoman in the beginning of the prayer, after the little brachot. They used to cut the afikoman, and the piece that you hide, right? There's one that you hide, and the other piece, we used to put it in a piece of cloth, hold it in the corners, and put it around our shoulder. And we used to say, what was the prayer? משאר אותם סרורות בסמלותם על שכמם. And all of us tell us, where are you coming from? We used to say we come from Syria, from Lebanon, or whatever, and we tell them, so where are you going to? We're going to Eretz Israel. And we used to do this and bring it back. That was a symbol that when Bnei Israel left Egypt, they had no money, they had nothing. So all their stuff, they put it in a cloth, put it around their shoulder, and went out from Egypt.
The prayers were a bit different, and there was a Iraqi Haggadah where part of the singing was in Arabic, and I've been trying to see if there is the same passages in present Haggadahs, and there isn't. Something to do with the ritual sacrifice of lamb and killing of the lamb. And one used to sing, and I even remember the tune. كلوا ذبح البيس ذبح البيس لا 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 لا.
We never had cheese in Pesach. Cola, cheese, Lebanon, nothing, none of this. We used to have breakfast, eggs for breakfast for these 8 days. No cheeses at all. There wasn't kasher lePesach, not like now today.
What I'm holding in my hand is matzah, which we used to have in Algeria. It's still made in Agen. It is a different taste. It's certainly harder. Some people call it hardboiled, but we put it in soup. We make it as rice, instead of rice, because we don't eat rice as Sephardi. But it's not produced. It's not sold in this country, in England. It's not sold in Israel. It's only sold in France. And I go and get it every year in Marseille or in Paris. Some
of the food is something we don't have today. I remember these, and I guess some other people maybe from Iraq have it. They're very thin matzos, like when they do baklava, and then they would do layers of those things with meat in between and put it in the oven, and it was like a big pie. I remember that. And also remember the breakfast where we would have cheese between matzos that are dipped in egg and then fried, and it was delicious, and I still do that. My children and grandchildren love it.
So the mimona was this table with a dish with flour and eggs, I think 5 eggs, and broad beans, I think 7 broad beans sticking into the flour, a coin for money, and then a dish with honey, and a dish with milk. Then we had, they brought from the fields some wheat, the actual wheat cut from the field. Okay. Was spread on the table to adorn it, really. We didn't eat it. And the fish, always fish. Fertility and whatever. In some families, they dip their fingers in the flour and they put them on the head. But my parents, I don't remember doing that. What I do remember is that we had the maror, which was lettuce, dipped in honey, not salt water, so that we would have a sweet year.
Mm-hmm. And at the time when we used to live in Tangiers, we lived in a block of flat, and we would go from neighbors to neighbors, so it was great because we would go and eat a bit here, and then suddenly we would stay maybe half an hour, and then we would go to some other friend downstairs on the 3rd floor, and then it was the 2nd floor, and then people coming to us. It was really quite entertaining and quite fun, because for 8 days you don't eat flowers, so then you want to welcome again the flowers. So that is actually the only evening where you sat at the table only with sweet things. So you had lots of cakes and biscuits. And I remember my mother from early afternoon, just before the end of Pesach, she would get, from her maid would go and get some flour, and she will bake this sort of terid, which are also called mufletas, which are sort of pancakes just made with flour, oil, and water. And then you put honey on top. Yeah, it's sort of crepe if you want. Yeah. So you would bake them in this pot, which was a clay pot. You see. Yes, so that was a typical thing to eat, the mufletas or the terid for Mimona.
Wow. You know, what struck me when I saw that was the fact that, you know, there's so many similarities, right? The long seders, the Haggadah, you know, and yet there were such different customs. There's, you know, I think that really speaks to what Judaism is all about, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and even within, I think it shows as well, like within the, you know, the huge region that we interview, there are differences and subtle differences, but there are also similarities, and that's always what's really interesting, to kind of see those two things come together.
Right. I mean, Pesach, that's what really it's about, right? It's about all these meanings and symbols that we really want to have at the table. So the children should ask, you know, why are we doing this? Why do we have, you know, all the questions that we put on, all the symbols that we have on the Seder plate. What was interesting was, you know, during COVID, you know, when we were a little bit, you know, more lenient when the London Basin gave us a little more leniency on the Pesach goods. At the first question, we wanted to know, can we eat rice now? Like a lot of people want to eat rice. And now to see the amount of work and effort that you have to do to make sure you check it and make sure that it's kosher for Pesach. It's not just rice, right? It's all like, and interesting also to note that not every Sephardic group eats rice as well.
Yeah, and not every group eats the same bit of kitniot, so which is also quite interesting. Like, I was speaking to my grandmother like 2 days ago, and I was like, "Softa, did you eat like broad beans full in Sudan on Pesach?" And she just looked at me, she was like, "These days people eat all sorts of things, but it's like we would never eat that. Like all they would eat was rice, and that was it." And like another very common one, which always made me laugh, was that they would never eat hummus, like chickpeas, because hummus sounds like chametz.
Oh,
you know, don't eat it just in case. So it's this like little customs, and I think Pesach is the kind of flashpoint almost in Judaism for all these like very personal things that come out. Like I think everyone has got like a specific memory of their Seder from when they were a child that's like very unique to them. And what's really interesting is that the more people I interview, the more I see like little similarities, like that song that the lady sang, that with the order of the Seder, like right. We sing that song, and I never knew where that came from. Like it was just something that my family did, and I never, you know. So wow. It's really interesting. Like you learn small
bits and pieces. Yeah, I mean that's really the message of Pesach, right? That we want to be able to remember us as a Jewish people, that you know that we had this, and everything that we remember from it. You know, so my mother's Algerian, my dad's Ashkenaz, so you know we have quite a mix of traditions going on there. So now my dad, you know, picks up the car, you know, the Seder plate with and goes around during Halach Ma'anya. I don't know. Do you do that?
We don't do that.
It's I don't know. It's. I think the Moroccans also do it. We go around the head of the table, and it's something that you know I that's what I grew up with. So you know but that's what customs are, right? They're weird and wonderful, and that's what really keeps us going as a Jewish nation. And to be able to see the diversity, even you know amongst a group that people lump together as the same, really speaks to that.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So how so Sephardic Voices UK put this together, and what's their goal? What's their mantra behind?
So when it was started in 2011, and the idea was kind of to capture as many of these testimonies as possible before they were lost, because all that generation are getting very old. These communities no longer exist. And if it's not documented, it's gone. It's not written down. It's only in the last maybe like 2-3 years that it's become more people have started to write about these put these things down in a book. But 10 years ago that wasn't a thing. And even now in the UK, I think we're the only organization actually recording these stories and these testimonies.
Yeah. Oh, wow.
So it's a very, it's a minority within a minority, and people are. It's a race against time to collect and to make sure that these testimonies are not lost, which is why it's so important to make sure that they're done properly, that the interviews are done well, that they're not kind of edited, that they're basically primary source material. And that's kind of the original goal of Sephardi Voices. And now we're kind of also moving into education. So things like these videos, and we do monthly events, and just to try and now we have all these stories and these voices. We have 112 interviews.
Wow.
So like what can we do with them? There's no point having all this information if people can't learn from it.
Right. No, absolutely. And I think, the food, the real difference is in the food of the Sephardim, right, versus the Ashkenaz, right? You really see that, like people always appreciate the spice, the spiciness. And I wonder how, that's probably another whole conversation, how they have that reputation, or how they were able to, create such, unless
Well,
why is that?
Well, first of all, they're on the Silk Road, the like geographical location. So the food is not that different. There's Jewish variations of food that everyone in the country was eating, first of all. And I think second of all, there's a certain creativity that comes from scarcity. And that now we eat these foods and we think, wow, they're so like rich and, amazing. And the Jews in these Middle Eastern countries were living not all of them, of course, but on the whole, we're living quite middle-class lives in the 50s and 60s, and 40s, 50s, 60s. But before that, especially, countries like Egypt, Iraq, like the Jews had, there were legislation. There's been legislation against Jews, owning businesses, doing all sorts of things. And Jews were not, the reason Jews left Iraq in the 1850s, 1860s was because life was so hard there. So I think that there is this kind of, now we think it's normal, but it's going back to Pesach, the amount of work that went into Pesach food is just mind-boggling. Like,
and the preparation, and the cleaning and the preparation for it, you could see how serious they took it,
Yeah, and they literally bought nothing in Pesach. Like in Sudan, for example, it's what I know most, so I can talk about it. They literally bought nothing. Even some people, like a lot of families, some of them bought matzah but they had to import it from England, so it was really expensive. So they even made their own matzah. They would make their own jams. They didn't, like the Lebanese lady said, they didn't have cheese because cheese was made with rennet. Not like everything was made completely from scratch, and that is just mind-boggling to me.
Right, and when you can just walk into a kosher kingdom that has like everything made already, it's a different world. I don't know if there are any of viewers have any questions for Daisy. Please post them. But it's definitely something that talking about Sudan. When you go back there, have you been?
I went back for the first time in January. January, obviously the January before lockdown.
Right.
I went with my brother. It was amazing. We went for 6 days and we just went to kind of see it.
And was there any remnants of Jewish community?
There's a cemetery there in Khartoum, but that's it. The synagogue doesn't exist. The club, no one knows exactly where it is. I don't think it still exists.
Wow.
There wasn't a Jewish school. There wasn't, so we went to the market where my grandfather had his shop, but we obviously couldn't locate the exact place, but we saw the market at least. So.
And you felt safe? Was it safe? Did you feel?
We had someone with us. We had like a driver who was also like helping us get around. We didn't tell anyone we were Jewish, but yeah, it felt like the market was, there's not a lot of tourism in Sudan. But.
Hence the reason why they made a Dead Sea resort.
No, honestly, like it was beautiful. Like they have more pyramids in Sudan than they have in Egypt. Like it's an amazing place. Like I really hope that it takes off because
interesting.
Change that up.
Very
it's
interesting.
Really beautiful. Yeah.
Well, thank you very much for joining us. As we exit Egypt, Egypt, they went through Sudan to hopefully get back to Israel, really. As we exit Egypt this Pesach, we're exiting the COVID era that we've been in, and really going to make the best of it and become the miracle. The Nisan is, has the word Nes in it, has miracle in it. And so we should be able to learn from our past, really make something, take the positives that we're taken from the journey that we've been through, and make it a positive experience, and really embrace the diversity that Judaism has to offer. Is there anything you want to say?
No, thank you for having me. I've had a really lovely time.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you. Have a good evening and happy Pesach.
Happy Pesach.